So, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome again to this session that we're very proud to have this lovely panel with us today. And in also thanking our partner, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, for joining this conversation and helping us host this today. So I'm going to start by, placing us in the topic, and that tourism, has been a source of opportunity. It's been a source of pride. It's been a source of economic growth across island nations. It has created jobs, supported livelihoods, and it's connected people. But increasingly, we're hearing different sentiments emerge. Residents are feeling crowded out of their communities. Housing becomes harder to access. Infrastructure is stretched, sometimes beyond its limits in capacity. And everyday spaces start to feel less accessible for those people that live there. And when this happens, a deeper question begins to surface. Who is the destination really for? So this question matters because it signals something is starting to shift. And if it's not addressed early, it can really erode trust and support for tourism itself. So today's conversation is not about stopping tourism. It's about understanding how to manage it with real limits, how to recognize the early warning signs, and how to make informed decisions about what level of tourism is not just possible, but is sustainable for communities. Because ultimately, success is not measured by arrivals alone. It has to be measured by whether tourism continues to work for the people who call these places home. So before we get into this conversation, we're going to present a little poll for everyone, just to kind of see where people are, today. So a poll is going to show up really quickly. There we go. Just to really understand, where you are in this particular journey when it comes to tourism growth and the challenges of experiencing over tourism. So this is great. Thank you for all the responses that are coming in. Is your destination or company already struggling with over tourism? Well, it seems to be 50-50, which is normal. And how prepared the destination or management company feel, which is, a little bit disjointed in the answers. But look at that. So we have responses now. I think, yeah. So is your destination or company already struggling with over tourism? So we got a little bit of a 50-50 break over here. And then again, how prepared your destination is to manage over tourism. And there is, somewhat and not at all, and maybe particularly not sure, which is concerning, right? So this is a great moment to have this conversation. So with that, I'd like to invite Sharon. So I'll stop this poll. Can we stop the poll? Share results. Share results. Okay. Okay, fantastic. We've shared results, and I will stop the poll. Okay. All right. So with that, I'd like to invite Sharon Banfield, Director of Resource Mobilization Development of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, and our partners in this webinar to share a few opening reflections. Sharon, please.
Thank you so much, Paloma. Most appreciated. And good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, partners, attendees. It is truly my pleasure to welcome you to this important session on No Room Left when tourism growth pushes residents out. And at the outset, I really would like to extend sincere thanks to Sustainable Travel International, and in particular to its Chief Executive Officer, Paloma Zapata, for their valued partnership and continued commitment to working with the Caribbean Tourism Organization and its members to advance sustainable tourism across the Caribbean. I would also like to thank our distinguished speakers for making the time to contribute to this discussion, including representatives from Planeterra, We have from Curaçao, we have the Caribbean Tourism Organization, as well as Turks and Caicos Islands. Your insights and perspectives are invaluable, and we are really grateful for your participation. Now, tourism has been long been a cornerstone of economic development, as Paloma said, in the Caribbean, and it has created opportunities and it supported many livelihoods across the board and positioned our region as kind of one of the most sought after destinations globally. But as tourism continues to grow, so too, of course, do the pressures associated with that growth. So in small island context, where space and infrastructure, as Paloma mentioned earlier, and natural resources are inherently limited, these pressures are often felt more acutely. So issues such as housing availability or access to public spaces and the capacity of essential services are becoming increasingly prominent across our region. And that is why today's discussion is so important. It really reflects a recognition that the Caribbean must take a proactive and coordinated approach to managing tourism growth, one that safeguards the well-being of residents while ensuring the long-term sustainability of our important tourism sector. So this is not about limiting tourism. It's about managing it more effectively. It's about using the right tools, having the right partnerships and policies that would help us to maintain that balance. So in this regard, conversations such as these are critical. They provide an opportunity to share experiences, to identify practical solutions, and to strengthen our collaboration across our destinations and across stakeholders. And they also reinforce the importance of working together as a region and with our partners to address the shared challenges that we face. So as we continue this dialogue, I would also like to take the opportunity to highlight an upcoming milestone event for our region. So from the 27th of April to the 30th, we will be convening the Caribbean Sustainable Tourism Conference in Belize, specifically in San Pedro. And this conference will further advance the discussions on sustainability, resilience, and innovation in tourism. And it will provide a platform to build on many of the themes that will be explored here today. So we really look forward to welcoming you to Belize and to continuing this very important conversation in person. So in closing, again, I want to thank all of you for joining us and for your continued commitment to shaping a more sustainable and inclusive future for Caribbean tourism. I wish you a very productive and engaging session. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sharon, for your intervention and for the work that you're doing in the Caribbean Tourism Organization. And very much looking forward to Belize and to convening with everyone, here on the table and, participating in the session. So before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the panel and set the stage. So we were originally joined by the Honorable Tourism Minister Zavargo Jolly of the Turks and Caicos Islands, who unfortunately couldn't join us today due to unforeseen circumstances. But we're very grateful to have Brian Bean with us, who leads policy planning, monitoring, and evaluation for the Ministry of Tourism of Turks and Caicos and brings an important ministerial perspective to this conversation. We're also joined by a fantastic group of voices here today. So Narendra Ramgulan, Deputy Director of Sustainable Tourism from the Caribbean Tourism Organization, who brings a regional lens across the island destinations. Muriel De Bruin, Managing Director of Curaçao Tourist Board, who brings destination level perspective on managing tourism growth and planning ahead. And Kelly Galaski, Senior Director of Operations and Head of Impact of Planeterra, who works closely with communities and the private sector to ensure tourism delivers meaningful benefits on the ground. So to start, I'd love to ground this conversation in your experiences. Each one of you comes from a different perspective, but often the way we understand these challenges, really shape what we've actually seen firsthand. So I'm very curious first to know about your path. So please, take a moment to introduce yourselves. And I would like to hear, was there a moment in your work where you started to see tourism differently, where the balance between growth and impact became more visible or more real to you? So, Muriel, let's start with you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Paloma, thank you very much for organizing this panel. For us, it's an honor and privilege to be here as Curaçao in this panel. My name is Moria de Bruin. That's a very Dutch last name, De Bruin for the English speaking. Um, Director of Tourism for the Curaçao Tourist Board here in Curaçao, this beautiful island of Curaçao. My background a little bit, been in the tourist board for the past 10 years, different roles, and for the past 3 years in the director role. Based on your question, we were always the new kid on the block. Actually, right now, we're the new kid on the block when it comes to tourism. For the past 30 years, Curacao has been focusing on other industries, the refinery and the financial sector. Tourism was always there, but for the past 5 years, tourism had a surge in growth when it comes to visitor arrivals, investment, and all of that. So for us, being a new kid on the block was a moment of clarity from the tourist board and from the ministry to, hey, we see what's happening around the world when it comes to excessive tourism or over tourism. And I say, hey, before we get to that point, let's start right now when it comes to planning and thinking with all the stakeholders how we can avoid that. Because at the end of the day, I tell everybody, we as people from Curacao, we here are we live 365 days a year here, and the tourists come from an average 8 to 9 nights. They enjoy what we live 365 days a year, so we're inviting them to just a small piece of fraction in their lives. So for us, important is to keep our destination livable and a great destination for us, and the tourists that come in can enjoy what we have to offer. So that is why we look into, together with our ministry, to, hey, let's look for the years ahead and how we can structure and manage tourism growth as best as possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Narendra?
Yeah, thank you so much, Paloma and Myriad, and a very, very warm, welcome to our viewers from across the globe. Because I've noticed, I was just going through and looking and seeing where persons are from, and we have people from all over the globe logging in for this webinar. So thank you again for organizing this and for partnering with us. One experience I would say that would have stayed with me, and I'm going to give a different perspective. I'll give one as a kid growing up, right? And it really shaped, the way I started thinking about tourism, was when I was younger and we visited a place in Tobago called the Boko Reef, right? I remember going out on the reef and noticing, how many fishes there were, and the reef, how beautiful it was, and the quality of the experience and so on. And then I remember visiting that same reef 10 years after. And what I noticed was how crowded it was. Boats were continuously arriving. Many were filled actually beyond what I would consider comfortable. So I didn't even know anything about carrying capacity and all of these things back then, but I knew it felt uncomfortable, going on these crowded boats and so on. And as I observed things, a bit more closely, I noticed more things, propping up. So, for example, you had a lot more waste being generated. People were throwing things. People were not just snorkeling. Instead of 10 years later, they were not just snorkeling, but they were standing on the reef. They were touching it. They were breaking pieces off to take with them as souvenirs. And at that time it was just simple and easy to dismiss it as just a busy day, in the life of tourism. But what really stayed with me was that stark difference of when I first visited and then when I visited 10 years after. How degraded the reef was, how there were fewer fish, how it was less vibrant, how there was less life, and what was once a thriving natural asset, it started to become, in the local parlance, they started to call them zessa boats and party boats and so on, going out for a different experience, and that experience in itself, it crystallized something in me, and the issue was not about tourism. It was about how unmanaged tourism was. And it was about dealing with that unmanaged volume, where we had prioritized numbers over value and access over protection of that resource. We had compromised short-term gains over long-term sustainability. And that's a moment that stayed with me, and that's why even up until now, up until today, it is one of those reasons I'm so committed to advancing a more balanced approach to tourism, one that protects what we have, but it also seeks to manage how the resources we have, how it's being utilized and managed and so on, so that the future generations can enjoy it as well. So that was one of those moments, Paloma.
Thank you. I think all of us from the Caribbean can relate to that experience. We can always think about like it used to be different and remember the past, no? But thank you for sharing that. And Kelly, please introduce yourself and talk about your experience.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, so honored to be part of this important discussion. Thank you for having me today. For me, it's really been my entire career, even starting from my undergraduate studies as the culmination of that degree in tourism. We did a field trip to Jamaica for 2 weeks. We traveled all around the island. We circumnavigated the island and visited different kinds of tourism models, from all-inclusives to villas, community tourism sites, attractions, and discussed the different and compared the different styles, the opportunities, the challenge. So that even being 25 years ago, the discussion around the benefits and pros and cons to the different kinds of models. And and then from every experience of travel in myself and then ongoing throughout my career, it's been a focus of my life, really, understanding and seeing the difference in places where people really are the tourism industry, through a very diversified small business kind of tourism economy, to where people are really excluded. It's quite stark. And so, yes, I've dedicated my life to this today, representing Planeterra, international nonprofit organization that we are dedicated to uplifting communities through tourism. So bringing insights from these past 15 years in direct community tourism development in over 80 countries, and developing responsible travel policies for the tour operations sector. But also having done some work for a local DMO where I live in Western Canada, and spent a couple of years working for the Travel Foundation, where I worked on some of the assessments and strategies for places really struggling with some of these issues, including Lake Tahoe and Vail in the United States. And I've just always felt through those early experiences, in my early 20s, throughout all of these years, understanding that the power that tourism has to create positive impacts, as well as its ability to create those negative impacts. So how we can find that balance is truly a passion of mine.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's impressive how like one impactful experience can really shape the rest of your life. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Brian, I would love to hear from you.
Sure. Good day, and thank you so much, Paloma, for having me, and to the team. My name is Brian Bean, and currently I am the Tourism Policy Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation Manager, a mouthful, within the Ministry of Tourism within the Turks and Caicos Islands. And of course, my background actually began with the local tourist board at the destination level, where I was responsible for product development. And also I played lead role in the 2005 update of the National Tourism Strategy, and later on in 2015 with the KPMG strategy. Now, for me being within the ministry, the moment that truly shaped my view of tourism growth was when I was appointed the lead for the National Tourism Carrying Capacity Study here in country. Now, for the Turks and Caicos Islands, that was perhaps the most intense tourism study ever carried out. So for me, it created a flashback moment going back to 2005, because the gentleman that led that particular initiative, Mr. Ainsworth O'Reilly, right, he's passed on at this time, prayers with his family still. And what actually transpired was that he instilled in me the need for carrying capacity. This was one of his, I guess, key PowerPoint, so to speak, in terms of carrying capacity. So for me to see almost 20 years later, we're looking at what he spoke about at that time, was truly an impactful moment for me. And to, of course, have the task to carry out such a venture for the country is important, because coming from the ministry side now, I would have seen a much more broader approach as opposed to what I would have seen earlier in my career. So that was one of the, I guess, changing points in my life that would have truly shaped my view in terms of the growth of tourism, and ensuring, as Naranja said, ensuring that there's a balance at the end of the day.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, and we're still, talking about, the same, issues and how to really balance, growth in a sustainable way. So let's start the conversation in the panel discussions. Let's really talk about, what those signals are, what the pressures that may be starting to appear. It may be different in different places, or maybe similar across, and also from your different perspectives. We have, like, across the board, a wealth of knowledge and perspectives here. So I really would like to explore those early warning signs, how you guys are seeing it from your different perspectives. So Brian, I'll start with you from a policy and planning perspective. When do you start to see that tourism growth may be moving away out of balance with local realities? What are those signals that begin to really raise concerns?
Okay. For me, I would say initially through conversation and stories, right? We're a small community that
Mhm.
love to speak whenever there's an issue. So looking at it from a ministerial context, we would have had, I guess, the anecdotal evidence in terms of people doing, be it social media posting or even just basic conversation. So for us, what we found was that some of the same issues are, be it the unavailability of long-term housing, for example, or even the challenges that employers would face in terms of being able to secure workers because of the challenge in terms of having affordable accommodation for their workers, especially those who may be migrating into the country. Because a country like the Turks and Caicos, as you know, we are made up perhaps of 70% of persons from the outside. So we're heavily dependent in terms of the migration pull factor that takes place because of tourism. And also in terms of the threat in terms of informal settlements, of course, coming about because of such a pull factor in the tourism industry. But what we saw in 2003 when we began the carrying capacity study was that a lot of these signals could actually be quantified finally and measured, right? And this is where we would have seen, for example, uh, we would have been able to look at the actual number of persons that impact our environment holistically. Usually we would just look at the population and say we'll do it based on the population stance, as opposed to also looking at the impact plus the visitors, right? Having the visitors tied into that impact. For example, Turks and Caicos, we're a population now of just under 50,000 people. But when you factor in the daily visitor component, then that swells, of course, to 70,000 people. So what it makes you realize is that when in fact you're catering perhaps for 50 or 60,000, you should actually be catering for 70 or 80,000. And here it is that we begin looking at some of our early warning signals that would have come about with the study, such as social pressure, because oftentimes we place a lot of emphasis on the economic and environmental factors, but sometimes we allow the social cultural, of course, to slide under without being noticed. It's under the radar. So for us, we would have considered that, and especially with some of the numbers that would show roughly 10 to 15 visitors per person if we were to actually try to calculate this. And what is the impact? The housing deficit, I know that we spoke about this earlier. And in our situation, what we also realized is that this was actually being fueled also by tourism, right? You would have had people with short stay properties, vacation rentals, who are pulling their long-term rental properties out and creating short-term rentals. So these are some of the issues, of course, that we would have faced, and we would have been able to more accurately zoom down on it. And also in terms of, I guess, some of the hidden exposures that would take place. For example, the revenue component for the government in terms of operations that may not have been regulated as a hotel property or a full accommodations property. A lot of these things are now flagged as signals for us. And also, we would have to look at, as I mentioned earlier, some of your social indicators, be it the threat of crime or even the threat in terms of social fallout through cultural shocks and the like. So, a lot of this would have been considered when we would have moved forward with the carrying capacity study. And one of the things that we would have tried to do, I'm going to real quick, was to have a dual survey approach. And when I say dual survey, where the actual advisory committee would have been surveyed separately from the general population to ensure that we're able to actually look at the challenges and to see whether or not they correspond, which they did. And it was holistic in nature in terms of having uh, gentrification, housing situation, right? And also you would have had social ills, and you would have had that of the cultural pressures coming about as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that that journey that you guys had, and those early warning signs. And this is leads into the next question that I have for Myriad. So Curaçao is taking a proactive approach, as you mentioned earlier, by commissioning the carrying capacity study. So what made this the right moment to start asking these questions about balance and limits?
Tourism growth. We've been growing as a destination in double digits for the past 3 years. We pretty much doubled what we had pre-COVID. So pre-pandemic, 2019, we doubled that, and actually doubled that in a couple of years. What other destinations, our neighboring destinations, took, for example, 10, 15, 20 years to build, we're doing that in a very short time. So this builds pressures on the island, and I agree with Mr. Brian what he said. All these components that are building pressure, and they're highlighted for us. It was looking forward of, hey, we've growing double digits year over year. That means that we are going to face these things down the road, and we're already seeing and feeling that.
Mhm.
Those pressures. So that was actually one of the motivations for us to, hey, let's start looking at the study where we can manage to grow much better, and actually manage in a sustainable manner. We're not saying beneficial for everybody, of course, not only on economic fronts, but for on social level, but especially as well on our natural resources. So that is actually why we embarked on the journey very early in the process, because like I said, we are right now we are little by little maturing as a tourism destination. The community needs to go along with it, because I must say, for the past 30 years, like I said, heavy on refinery, heavy on financial sector. So our community as well needs to adapt that we are a tourism destination. From the tourist board, from the sector, we know it because this is our lives. But we have 150,000 people living in the island that are not day-to-day part of tourism. So those are all the things to get our community with us through tourism development and growth, actually.
Thank you. It's commendable that, to start planning, ahead before you get to an over-tourism situation, to really take charge and do in a sustainable manner. So that leads me now into Narendra. Across the region, what patterns are you seeing? Are there common early warning signs in the destinations that are starting to feel that maybe their limits are being reached?
Yeah, Paloma, yeah. So thank you. So for some of the countries, what we're seeing, and this is again for some of the countries, because the Caribbean is so diverse, and of course every country in the region is at its own pace, and so on. So it's hard sometimes to just bracket them and say, hey, yes, we are in that direction, or no, we're not in that direction. Now, for some of them, tourism growth is being celebrated, and then for other countries, I mean, it's really tourism pressure that's being felt. Now, the signals that we'd be looking at and what is consistent across the destinations would be one, Brian spoke to one of them, which would be housing pressure, and particularly because the land space and the land size is small. Brian spoke to them. Myriad spoke to it as well. So, for example, in places like Barbados and St. Lucia, you have a rise in short-term rentals, and that has started to compete directly with long-term housing for residents. So that's the first point. The second one, infrastructure strain. And also I want to add to that ecosystem strain as well. And ecosystem strain is an important one, because especially if a destination in the region is looking to go after an eco label like a blue flag, for example, you have to do reef checks and so on, depending on the beach and depending on where you're located and that sort of thing. And of course, I mean, if you have a lot of travelers, a lot of waste and so on being generated, and it flows out, that has a direct impact on your quest towards those eco labels and so on. So it's felt both at the ecosystem level, one, and two, the infrastructure strain I spoke about. So for example, sometimes in places like Nassau, St. Martin, St. Croix, for example, on cruise days, you can have, double the population within hours, placing stress on the roads, waste systems, public services. And Myriad went into that when he was speaking just now. In fact, and the third one, loss of access in some of the destinations, particularly the smaller ones. You would see a gap between legal access to beaches and practical access on the ground. There's a difference. And then the fourth one is perhaps the most important one, and that's the heartbeat of this webinar. You're seeing shifting resident sentiment. Resident perception is something I don't think we have enough studies of in the region. In fact, if I were to count, I remember the time when I was lecturing at the University of the West Indies. I was perhaps the only one at that time who actually did a peer-reviewed paper in the Southern Caribbean on resident perception at Storby. And I made mention of identifying factors and so on, understanding Doxy's irritation index and those sort of things within that particular study. So I think there's also a need as well to really understand how residents feel about it. And there are certain signs and signals, because destinations don't reach over tourism overnight. They get there by ignoring those small signals that happen along the way, and they ignore it for too long.
Yes. So the signals are there, you just have to listen to them. So Kelly, ground us now in the community experience, from working with the private sector and the community. So how do these pressures actually show up in people's daily lives, especially those local entrepreneurs and maybe some of those more vulnerable groups?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the daily life pressures have been shared by Brian and Myriad and Narendra around even when people start to see that suddenly they can't maybe access not just basic needs like increased price of water or electricity, but the recreational opportunities as well, like visiting restaurants or trails or beaches and things like that. So then they start to see, okay, what's going on here? The property and housing, of course, you've all covered extensively, and then those hidden costs as well. You've touched on just now, Narendra, but in terms of the entrepreneurship, it really, of course, tourism has the ability to lift up entrepreneurs and create many economic opportunities. But it can also depend on the tourism model. The dominant tourism model can have some reverse effects by actually suppressing the diversity of economic development if many things are imported or excursions or shops are controlled by external entities. So it's really leaving out the opportunities that are there, not only for existing entrepreneurs that have the capacity and the capital to create and start their own businesses, but the potential entrepreneurs, typically excluded community members, marginalized communities that have so much to offer, culturally, traditionally, producers of food and craft and all sorts of services when intentionally invested in, when the value chain is actually more inclusive from in an intentional way to provide investment in the infrastructure and the training and the access to capital and finance. There's truly a much greater opportunity that is not often seen when it's just left to some of the current models that we see.
Absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes, tourism growth can actually alienate some groups, and instead of being beneficial, it could actually be detrimental. So now that we see that these early warning signs are, they appear and they are visible, we acknowledge them, the conversation now shifts. So what do we do about this? No? So this is where it can get very complex because managing tourism growth can often mean making difficult decisions, right? So not optimizing everything at the same time is actually possible. So this is where, we make difficult decisions. So Brian, from your lens, what are some of those toughest trade-offs that you're seeing or expecting when tourism growth starts to put pressure on infrastructure, communities, and long-term sustainability?
Yes, thanks, Paloma. Here in the Turks and Caicos Islands, we've experienced about 75% or so, roughly, in terms of occupancy levels, right? Which is probably extremely high throughout the year. And because of this, we've seen, I guess, a lot of pressures being placed on the environment. But what has also happened, running parallel to that study, is that the government has realized that it's truly time to place real science behind the model, right? Where we have, in particular, in the destination of Providenciales, quite a bit of, I guess, inflection taking place, right? Or you have a situation where the market has truly heated up. And most recently, the government made a tough decision, which I would say is a tough decision that most destinations probably would never want to do. And this is where you start to put people before profit. And the reason why I say people before profit is that the government in February of this year had announced that they would end concessions to major developers on the island of Providenciales, which was a surprise to a lot of persons. But at the end of the day, it's to create that balance that we spoke about and try to spread that economic opportunity into other islands that right now, actually, how should I put it? They have the environment that's conducive to receiving, right, such investment, and all of the pressures that exist in Providenciales, for example, is in there because we find ourselves in a situation coming out of the same model where we would have developed three models for the country. One would have been the Providenciales model, which would have focused on gentrification as well as social sustainability. The second model would have been that of the Grand Turk model that would have focused on cultural sustainability and cruise shipping. Because, for example, on the island of Grand Turk, 7.5 miles, you have over 1.2 million cruise passengers coming yearly, right? So sometimes the population size of just under 7,500 doubles at times based on what ships are in that particular day. And then we have what is called the other islands. This is North Caicos, South Caicos, Salt Key, and the others who we have more of the emphasis being placed on the environmental strain that would be taking place in the country. So that decision that was done, it's more of a shift from growth at any cost to growth for the development of the people. So
Mhm.
that's what we're seeing taking place from our side of it.
Fantastic. So it's a lot of trade-offs, but like difficult decisions to make, but important ones to make. And
Yes.
Murad, now that you're starting to look at tourism growth through this carrying capacity lens, what has been the most challenging and what has surprised you the most along the way when it comes to turning these insights into real decision making?
Well, actually having the conversation. The most challenging thing is for us as an island is, like I said, first understanding that we are a tourism destination. That's from a tourist board perspective. We are, conveying that to the public that we are a tourism destination, and right at the same time that we need to um, take care, one, of the industry, but at the same time handling with all these challenges when it comes to the carrying capacity. So, and it's, I say it bluntly, it's not only on population level, but also on the government level. Having these conversation that that at one point needs to be turned into policies and decisions from our government. That is the stages that we are in right now, and the industry, we tourist board together in the industry, we're having this conversation already. We're conveying these conversations already, but now is the next step, having policymakers, government, to act on it in a certain way. So that's one of the challenges, and that getting everybody on board, not to be anti-tourism, but to see the opportunities and strengths when it comes to managing that growth. So that is something that we are right now in the middle, because our carrying capacity study was done last year. So it is for us, and us from the tourist board, the sector, and everybody, something new to just have the conversation on it, and then develop those conversations into policies and decisions.
Absolutely. Aligning everybody,
Correct.
everybody being on the same page. And speaking of that, Narendra, what are you seeing a shift? Is there a shift in how success is being measured across the region? Are we moving away from volume-driven growth to a more, positive, impact growth?
Yeah, absolutely, Paloma. And I just wanted to tack back to that point Kelly was talking about. When it comes to opportunities and so on in the region, they actually open up when we go in the direction of diversification, and layering those levels. So that's when entrepreneurship really steps in, and it really kicks in. Because what we've been doing in the Caribbean, and this is the shift and the turning point, is that we're not just looking at sustainability from blue and green only. We're looking at sustainability and managing tourism through blue, green, orange, purple, brown, black, the different colors of sustainable tourism development. And under the purple economy, it actually talks about entrepreneurship, inclusivity, diversity, and so on. That's Sustainable Development Goals 5 and 8. And for success in the region, in the past, success was measured by one thing: arrivals only. We were just counting heads, you know. But as destinations and as time went on, we started looking at, more is not always better, especially in small island contexts where our livelihoods are dependent and so on the natural environment, particularly, especially the ocean, fishing and so on. And what we are starting to see in our part of the world is a shift from value towards volume. You're actually seeing a lot more persons looking for those immersive, experiential, value-based type of holiday. And even if we were to look at the study last year, Booking.com study, their 2025 study, they actually showed that people are willing to pay more for those smaller, immersive type experiences than the ones that are driven by volume. So again, value again takes precedent. We're also seeing as well a change in the length of stay over headcount. That's more important than headcount, and more importantly, impact over arrivals. I know this webinar is about over tourism, but in some of our Caribbean islands, under tourism is also an issue, and it's also a problem to be addressed. And cluster development is one of those ways of addressing that problem. But are the approaches converging and so on? Not entirely. As I said before at the beginning, some of our destinations, they're moving at a faster pace, at a faster rate than others. Some have actually started exploring limits, and tying it to environmental protection and community well-being, while others are still navigating that trade-off, particularly where tourism dependence is high. But what we're seeing is that you're seeing divergence in pace, but you're seeing convergence in direction, where everybody is trying to move in that same direction, not at the same pace, but of course they're moving in that direction where tourism must be managed and not maximized.
Fantastic. This is a positive direction that you need to continue encouraging destinations to continue on this journey. And Kelly, again, take us back to this community experience. So what actually needs to change and how tourism operates for communities to truly benefit? What does good look like when it's done right?
Yeah, thank you. I really believe that it looks like taking a close look at the business model itself. There's so many opportunities lost really when organizations are trying to invest in things like CSR or ESG initiatives that are completely disconnected to their own supply chain. And your own supply chain is really the power and the biggest opportunity for any business to create positive impact and demonstrate responsibility through action. So whether that's looking at the challenges being faced in the destination, social, environmental, and then investing in not just projects, but looking at all of your procurement and how you're actually purchasing products and services, and how you could directly fund through purchases that you would normally make the transformation, and whether that's the diversification or climate resilience through restoration and thinking really logically about what those shifts in your business practices could be, that could truly make a difference. The marginalized communities, they're just looking for the agency to take their ideas forward, get that access to investment in, from capital to infrastructure, from market research, from those that have that, for the training from those that have that understanding of the market and the access to the market, to be able to pursue those ideas that can fit the market demands and lead to those, meaningful experiences and those meaningful income opportunities. So people do feel that they're part of it and part of that decision making as well around how tourism is developed. It was spoken about, getting that resident sentiment, getting that understanding of how people feel, but quite often that the traditional model of collecting that data is exclusionary in its own way. So, for example, the survey and the town hall meeting, that doesn't necessarily allow for people who work in hospitality and tourism to show up to those meetings, for caregivers who aren't able to get out to those meetings, for people who speak other languages that are part of the community that can't take part in those meetings. And we just started to scratch the surface in our Vail and Tahoe strategies, but by going to different community groups, having meetings with workers in the hotels, and having the hotels give breaks for those workers to come to a meeting to really gather their insights, to really incorporate all of those into what the strategy needs to be. It takes more effort, it takes more time, but it's so much more meaningful to have the varying diverse communities and often marginalized communities perspectives that help to change the policies and the efforts of the private sector and the public sector.
So really giving people a voice, and really listening, to people. It's really going to give you the solutions when you listen to the people, what people are saying. So it makes those trade-offs probably a lot easier to make once you actually listen and you know that, the decisions that you're going to make are going to be beneficial for the communities. We are getting close in time, and I would like to take some questions from the audience. Let's see. Before I'm gonna look for the questions and share while we get maybe we had a little poll that we were going to have. Yes, thank you. So this is while I get the questions, please fill out this poll, and it's really to just to know what kind of topics, under the these webinar series that we're doing, focused on over tourism. What is the next topic that you would like to hear? So please take a second to do that. Okay, so I got the questions. We have a few questions. You are able to also upvote the ones that you want to hear, and we would just make sure because we may not have a lot of time to go through all of them. But yeah, as you are, answering the poll, I'm going to start the first question. So you've all mentioned using the right tools and partnerships. What concrete tools, such as policy frameworks, technology, financing mechanisms, are you actually finding useful? What are the gaps that these mechanisms leave behind? Anyone specifically want to take that? Maybe Brian, do you want to take this one?
Okay. For us, what we did in terms of the tools, when we carried out the carrying capacity study, we formed an advisory committee, right? Because we know that you cannot operate in silos. And from a tourism perspective, this is what traditionally occurred. You would have had operators and the others, of course, along with government. And this isn't something that's unique just to Turks and Caicos, but I guess regionally to some degree, where decisions would be made and options would be taken without that true buy-in from the wider scope in terms of the technocrats. So what we did was, first of all, we formed an advisory committee that would have encompassed key agencies. The reason why I said key agencies are, for example, you would have had the Ministry of Finance, right? They would have sat on that advisory committee because they would know in terms of the best policies that could be identified, be it MSME initiatives, right? Or other incentives that the government may have available. Also, we would have had the Statistics Authority because they're the ones who actually are the statisticians in the room. Also, we would have had economists on the team. This is from the advisory side, who would have been able to sift through and see what is actually workable in terms of recommendations being put forward, right? Along with other agencies such as the Department of Tourism Regulations, right, that deals with the regulatory side of the industry in Turks and Caicos, and also Experienced Turks and Caicos, who's the promotional and product development for the country. So them, along with other agencies such as the Department of Environment and Coastal Resources, who would have, of course, come in with the environmental aspect, and also we would have had that of the cultural impact also being taken into consideration. Now, what was done to also limit any potential fallout was that we focused on engagement, right? And when we did the engagement, we ensured that it wasn't a political initiative, so to speak, right? And we had buy-in where we met with the opposition, right? And also we met with the entire, at the time, House of Assembly. So you would have had all elected members being briefed on what we are about to do, what we're doing, and at the end, they got to see the final report. And what this allowed was for national buy-in at the higher level, where persons would have been able to better understand what was going on, as opposed to coming across as some, I guess, political initiative, so to speak. Because at the time in 2003, this was actually listed as one of the government's key strategies, right, within the national budget. So for us, this is how we had approached it, and this way we would have been able to have a high degree of, I guess, transparency, which would have been important, and also that buy-in from partners, because we would have had also private partners. The hotel association would have been a key partner in terms of consultation. The utilities companies, they also would have been a key partner in terms of consultations. And also, the team would have, and this is the Tago Euro who conducted the actual study, the team would have also reached out to individuals who we would say are on the fringe side of the economy, persons who may not fall within the formal markets, the average guy who may be sitting under a tree on the corner, right? Who may not be within the environment to perhaps come to the town hall meetings and so forth. So you would have had these persons engaged too. So I think once you take that sort of approach to it, something that's integrated fully, I think your output would be totally different rather than not taking that approach. Because with this study, our approach was that everyone's voice counts once you're willing to respond to what we're asking you.
Thank you for that. And let's take another quick question. Not all these can necessarily be quick, but building upon the conversation earlier on diagnostics, one early signs of overtourism are detected. How can DMOs actively manage tourism flows, specifically those strategies or tools that have proven effective in dispersing visitor traffic away from these few pressure points toward alternative sites in or off-peak times in order to reduce tension and over-visited destinations while still supporting sustainable economic benefits? Kelly, you want to take that? Yes, please.
Yeah, just quickly, I won't give some very, very specific ones, but I will say that some of the destination stewardship strategies that are available online, I'm sure we can share some links to all the participants, have some really concrete measures, from tools for managing timed entries, traffic flows, revenue mechanisms, all kinds of tourism management strategies that have been tested and used in destinations around the world. There's lots compiled by the Travel Foundation and others. Certainly, there are lots of good concrete tools that can be shared. So there are some things out there. It's not just speculative or general. There are some really great and emerging all the time more and more tools. So yeah, I think we can probably look at sharing some of those. You probably
Absolutely,
have some
we will.
as well.
Myriad, did you want to say something here?
Yeah, it's about starting off from the government side, together with the government side, having that strategy outlining what are the pressure points, getting those gathering of data, and then having that conversation. Us from here, the tourist board, we're working on a destination management areas where we have identified the most pressure points or the most pressure areas, and this is just only when it comes to let's say stayover visitors, because the layer of cruise tourists are also very, very hard. And then talking with the tour operators, talking with the investors, and how we can move away from all some parts, and then how we can spread it around a little bit better. For example, on the amount of square miles, Curaçao is a relatively okay sized island, but everything concentrates in a couple of places. We also say we have more than 35 different unique beaches, but only all the people, tourists and locals, go to 5 beaches. So how we can facilitate those other beaches with some kind of infrastructure or facilities to promote them as well, to spread them around. So those are the things that you will engage in little by little to start easing off the pressure on key areas.
Fantastic. So it's all about engagement. We did reach the top of the hour, and I'm conscious of time. So I really want to appreciate, everybody, but just with some closing comments, as we, start to wrap up, a few things really stand out from the conversation we've had. And first of all, is that these pressures don't appear overnight. They do build gradually. And there's a real opportunity here to really listen, to really listen to those early warning signs, because if you leave them, it will become much harder to address. So secondly, managing tourism is not just a technical problem, but it's about making choices. It's often about making those tough choices, no? Because balancing growth over livability, short-term gains over long-term sustainabilities can sometimes be a challenge. So going back to listening to the folks. But thirdly, this isn't something that just one actor can solve alone. All of you talked about, this transversal, this tourism is transversal. There's a lot of different actors, and a lot of different actors, need to align because responsibility is shared between governments, destinations, businesses, and communities. So most importantly, bringing it back to the simple question, what does success look like? No? Because it's not just about how many people arrive. It's about whether tourism continues to work for the people who call those places home. So if we keep that, front and center, and we can really make the right decisions along the way. So I hope this session has been eye-opening and inspiring for you to take a deeper look at the tourism growth in your destinations. And I want to thank you again for the gracious panelists that joined us here today with your thoughtful and open discussion, and for all of you listeners as well for joining, and for the also thoughtful questions. And thank you, and I hope to see you in the next webinar series.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.